You're listening to the Vint Podcast, where we bring you interviews and stories from around the world of wine and spirits. From winemakers and critics to sommeliers and master distillers, we'll explore the people and businesses who are instrumental in shaping the future of today's food and drinks culture. Enjoy the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Vint Podcast. My name is Brady, joined back in the studio by Billy Golenko. How you doing, Billy?
Very well. Excited for, another long weekend's coming up, so it's going to be nice.
Oh, that's right. You got big plans for, well, I should say today, because this episode launches on a Wednesday, but Valentine's Day. What's a Valentine's Day wine?
Oh, Valentine's Day wine. I feel like everybody that I've been reading has been sparkling rosé.
I was going to say rosé champagne is the...
Yeah, but I don't think we're really going to do anything tomorrow. I got her flowers over the weekend. I have a card I'll give her. So we're not really big Valentine's Day folks. I don't know. What about you guys?
Yeah, I don't know. We are living the last month and a half of pregnancy, pre-child life. So it's been a lot of nights just kind of hanging out at the house and relaxing. Yeah, probably do the card thing. Maybe we'll save the wine for after the kiddos come.
Yeah, that's probably safest. Yeah.
I'm like, nice. It won't hurt you. Take a dropper. Just there's actually a ton of stuff. Not a ton. I mean, it's not like everyone in the world's studying it, but there's been several papers about how you can drink a moderate amount while you're pregnant, and it's okay to sometimes. Some people say beneficial, just like in normal folks. But I don't know. I probably wouldn't risk it. But
yeah, yeah, I wouldn't. One small note on a champagne side is Napa Valley Wine Academy. We always give them plugs. They sent me a bottle of champagne for passing the diploma. And
nice.
2 notes on that. One, turns out I passed with merit overall, which I didn't know, which is nice. They should probably tell you that. And 2, it was like a vintage champagne. I was worried it was just going to be like a cheap non-vintage. It was like
you were worried. Wringing your hands, I hope.
Yeah, not necessarily concerned, but I was expecting. Anyway, I mean, they always do a great job with everything, so I had expectations. But sometimes when people send out these celebratory, it could just be. But anyway, it was like a 2012 Henriette. I can never say that name right. Henriette, I think it is. But if you look on Wine Search, they're anywhere from $90 to $120, so like $100 bottle, give or take,
nice.
Which is really nice.
Very nice, yeah. 2012 too.
Yeah, decent year.
A year with ebbs and flows and hypes.
Yeah, depending on the producer, it's either the best or mediocre. But yeah, so that also brings me, speaking of vintages, to our guests for today. I actually got to taste a wine of theirs from 2017, which is the latest release of one of their producers. So do you want to do a little intro and I can talk about that wine?
Yeah, we have on Vinalia today. Bruce and Mary are the co-founders of Vinalia, who our pregnancy became pre-child life over there. So it's been a lot of nights just kind of hanging out varieties, and they've developed a relaxing. Yeah, probably do the card thing, retail platform and club, wine club. Maybe we'll save some wine for really excellent wines from kiddos come. Producers in regions that don't get as much recognition, which I know is great. It won't hurt you. Right down the center for you, Billy, in terms of your interest. But you want to talk about some of the regions and actually a ton of producers, but sort of it's not like everyone in the world study that are represented in maybe the wine that you had about how.
Yeah. Well, first, a little bit more on Vinalia. This is a connection of mine. It's a friend of a friend introduced me to Mary and just kind of described what they were doing, a wine club. And not just a club now, they're also importing for distribution, focused on bringing awareness to lesser known varieties in the world, especially a lot of Eastern European varieties, which is something that I always try to do with friends, and it's near and dear to my heart. So I got to meet Mary, and she knows a ton about wine. She's really interesting. And I was like, you gotta come on the podcast. And then we got to speak with her and her co-founder, Bryce, who had also worked at a number of wine publications before and also wrote for Guild Somm, which is, he probably wrote some of the materials that I studied with back in the day. So they both know so much about wine, and it's really interesting to see them going and sourcing from a really wine educated point of view. It's like they're able to identify really quality in wines that are out there, but it's not just obscurity for obscurity's sake. These are great wines that they think have a market here in the US. And that's further driven by the fact that they met at business school. They met at University of Chicago Booth business school. So they both were like, I like wine. I want to make a business. And then I've done this. So it's kind of cool to see them actually do it in a really logical way, but with so much wine knowledge and passion.
Yeah, and they oversee the rebottling and labeling of these wines, and they really do a good job, I think, at paying homage to the producer and the place and the people behind the wine when they bring them in and try and tell the story of that wine in that region for folks here in the U.S. Because I think, as Mary talks about in the podcast, it's not as simple as just bring a great wine from in a quote unquote obscure place to the U.S. and it'll automatically sell because it's high quality. You have to tell the story also and present it in a way that's something that consumers here in the U.S. are going to gravitate towards. So I think they've done a good job at that. We talk about Lebanese wine, which we've talked about in the past on the podcast, which brings up Canadian wine that they're really loving right now, which is so some regions maybe that don't get as much airtime.
Yeah, I think then we get into it in the podcast too. They underplay the complexities of getting labels over to these producers all over the place, and because they are bottled and labeled at the producer and then they're mailed over here, which is again a complexity in its own. But yeah, so the wine. So I was really interested, and I ended up signing up for Vinalia actually on the episode as we spoke. And I got my first box. They come super fast. Mary was noting, it doesn't come as fast to me because I'm in California based on where they are, but they still came compared to most wine orders. It came really fast. I got a Hungarian white, which I happen to love Hungarian white wines. It's a blend. I got a Romanian wine made of Fetashka Niagara that I actually had this weekend. It was a 2017. That was one I was referencing earlier. I'll get back to that. And then a couple wines from Chile. Those wines from Chile one was a Carignan. I assume it's an older vine one. I haven't read the label that much. And a Moscatel, which nice. A dry Muscat style wine. Everybody loves those, but maybe that region and expression isn't as easily defined. So I thought that was really cool. But yeah, so this weekend I wanted to have one before the podcast. So we had some friends over for Lunar New Year celebrations, and I opened this, the Fetashka. I don't know exactly how you pronounce it, Niagara. It's cool because Bryce mentions in the podcast that the 2017 is their latest release. So these wines are well aged at the winery before release. I had tons of depth and complexity. So basically still had some fruit, but it also had a lot of that spice, some forest floor notes, and basically just I got like a lot of coffee too in a good way. But the nose just kept evolving, and that really led me to want to decant it. I tasted it first. I was like, oh, let me decant this, see how it opens up over time. But a cool comparison was that our friend brought a Napa Valley wine, and I won't name what it is, but it was basically just one of those brand wines, like bought fruit, cool label that cost $50 based on my research. And that wine was just so simple in terms of, it wasn't even like a soulful Napa wine. It was just basically like berries and cream, and basically just it really did taste really creamy, not even like spicy oak and like berries. And just having it next to this wine was crazy because there was so much depth and complexity. And I was like, maybe it's because the Romanian one has been aged longer. Let me leave them both out overnight and see what happens to this Napa one when it oxidizes a bit. I'm just simulating really quick age. Nothing happened. The fruit was just a little less bright, and that was it. It still tasted basically like vanilla in a glass, whereas the Romanian one actually was still standing up and showing different character. So I thought it was just an interesting juxtaposition, because my whole box from Vinalia was like about $100 total after tax, 94 something. So this bottle was the equivalent of $25 and half the price of this other wine, and it's just so much more interesting. And it's just it's kind of a small microcosm of why you should explore some of these out there varieties, rather than just sticking to a tried and true name that you have to pay more for.
Nice. Yeah, we had a little bit of a comparison ourselves this past weekend over the Super Bowl. Two wines, Bordeaux varieties. One was Palmerol. Was it Chateau Gazin? Is that right? Adam had brought, our master of wine had brought to an offsite a year ago. I think about a year ago. So it was a 2012. So I opened that alongside a 2016 Barbersville Octagon, which is their Bordeaux blend. And it was really cool to do that comparison. Both had really great acidity, really bright fruit. The Bordeaux was like darker, more like dense and rich in its fruit character, versus the Octagon, which was maybe just more red fruit and maybe, I don't know, a little bit thinner. So I would actually say on the palate, I was a touch disappointed. I didn't look up any vintage notes for that one. I'm not sure what kind of year that was. Maybe it was a little cooler, but I was just expecting maybe a little bit more dark fruit character in the octagon, but the Bordeaux brought that, and that was ended up actually being folks' favorite. But got good comments all around on both of those wines.
Nice. I wonder if it's Pomerol, it's probably mostly, if not 100% Merlot, so that might be the difference there.
Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, it was over 50%. I believe when I had looked it up, I thought, unless I'm confusing it with something else, but yeah.
Cool.
So,
well, nice. I'm glad to see you drinking wine when you can. I know you're going to be a busy dad, twins dad soon. So
twins dads. Yep, that's right. We'll actually probably drink more wine after that, because then my wife will be able to drink with me again, and I can open bottles without feeling bad about having to Corv in it 90 times.
True. Cool.
Yeah, let's leave you guys with our interview. Here are the folks from Vinalia, introducing you to Bryce and Mary. Enjoy.
Hi, Mary and Bryce. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Pleasure. Nice to see you, Billy.
I will have given a little bit more of an intro ahead of time, but one of my friends out here, two of my friends out here in LA had been telling me I needed to speak with their wine friend. And typically everybody has a wine friend, and it's always nice to chat with them. But they're like, oh no, this girl gets into obscure varieties and really likes those things, and they really know how to kind of get me excited. So I've been like waiting to meet Mary for months now, and finally got to meet her. And then once I met her, I was like, we have to have you and your co-founder on the podcast. So we're so excited to have you guys.
Oh, thank you so much, Billy. Yeah, I also heard all about you as well and everything you guys are doing. And I was so excited to kind of finally meet, and was a little surprised to hear that you also have a passion for obscure varietals, but you're really excited by it nonetheless.
Yeah, no, that's I guess our podcast listeners probably know now, but it's because I came into wine the roundabout way. I wasn't raised on Napa's the best, you should learn about these nice wines. I started by reading, and I was like, oh, these weird wines sound so much cooler. I'm Hungarian. I'm Slovakian. I want to learn about these wines, not necessarily California wines. So can you tell us a little bit about why we're talking about obscure varieties, what your company is, Vinalia, and kind of what it is, and then maybe a little bit of each of your backgrounds to kind of how we got here today?
Yeah, so I can kick it off. So I would say Vinalia is all about featuring the wines of the lesser known wine world. Our goal is to shed a spotlight on the regions, the grapes, and a lot of the producers that are overlooked by the mainstream American wine market. There are over 10,000 grape varieties out there, and over 50% of planted vineyards are dedicated to a mere 33. So what we want to do at Vinalia is introduce American consumers to those remaining 9,967, I believe.
Did you say that 50% of grapes are grown in 33 vineyards around the world?
Yeah. No, 50% of vineyards are dedicated to only 33.
I was like, you're about to just completely blow up my world.
Those be some
go on. So the giving people access to varieties that are lesser known, lesser appreciated, was that originally, as you both got into the wine game, your passion, or did that sort of evolve the way that, or in a way similar or dissimilar to what Billy just talked about?
So I think Mary and I each both got into the wine industry from separate avenues. And so I've worked in the wine industry ever since I was 21 years old, just based off of a whim college internship that I found on our college job board when my summer plans fell through before my senior year. But for the entirety of my 20s, I worked as a wine journalist and critic, writing for most of the major American wine publications. And I was on staff at Antonio Galloni's Venice. And then I was the staff writer at Guildsom, which is a major wine trade and education publication and platform. And I had the distinct privilege of getting to travel the world for 6 months out of the year for years and years, for the entirety of my 20s. I was living in San Francisco, so Napa and Sonoma were my backyard. Rioja and Tuscany and Burgundy were beats of mine that I got to cover and visit annually. But I also got to go to a lot of the more off the beaten track wine regions, places like Cyprus and Lebanon and Hungary and Uruguay, and all for work. And there were really a few amazing things that were happening in these places. Number one is, the quality to cost ratio of the wine just goes absolutely through the roof. For a small fraction of what you can pay for, wine in California, you can get an equally exceptional bottle from these places where you just can't pronounce the region or the grape variety with ease. And number two, and I think this is probably more important, is you feel like you're Anthony Bourdain when you're in these places. You're out on these dirt paths trying to decipher your GPS, and eventually you end up in the driveways of these wine growers whose families have been stewards of lands that they farmed for generations and champions of their local rare indigenous grape varieties or antique methods of wine production. And their story, as a journalist, always became my most read articles, which was great. I did my job. My editors were happy. But when I got to flipping the script to what the readers were experiencing, they're sitting there salivating, romantically attached to this wine, ready to pull out their credit card. But unless they're going to go on to Expedia and book a ticket to Beirut and then, hire a driver to take them to the middle of the Bekaa Valley, there's no way they're going to taste that old vine Lebanese Sanso that I'm writing about. So, I think we were experiencing a major disconnect between a generational shift in what people were finding interesting and exciting in the wine world and what was either literally in the United States or what people were able to access with a sort of fluency and ease that they needed to really find the maximum enjoyment from their wine experiences. And I know Mary had a totally different path to getting here, but luckily, we met in business school, and I'll let Mary share that story.
Yeah, thanks, Bryce. Yeah, I definitely do not have the traditional wine background at all. I came to wine later in life. After undergrad, I worked as a financial services consultant for several years. I eventually moved to Paris, France as my now husband, but at the time boyfriend. He's French, didn't get a visa. So our lives kind of got upended overnight, and we found ourselves booking a one-way ticket to Paris. And it was a great time over there. And as cliche as it sounds, I just really fell in love with wine living in France. It was just, I had such incredible access to amazing wines. And I'm not just talking about Burgundy, Bordeaux, Champagne, even though I love those wines too. It was more the ability for us to travel to the lesser known areas that I loved, Jura, Savoie. We went to Portugal, lesser known parts of Italy. And I just really was just so captivated and enthralled after meeting the producers over there, talking to them. And I was like, I just want to learn everything and anything about this business. So I started to get certified. I went down the WSET trek. I'm now a WSET diploma student. And I just made the crazy decision, or at least my friends and family at the time thought it was crazy, to just stop my life as a financial services consultant and decide to work in wine. So I wanted to pursue more the business side of wine. So I went back to business school to round out those skill sets, and very serendipitously met Bryce week one at Booth. And he told me, hey, why'd you come to Booth? And I was like, oh, I wrote my essay on pursuing wine entrepreneurship. And he was like, no way, me too. I was like, wow, that is pretty odd that the two people probably in this 600 person plus class ended up sitting next to each other during orientation. But that was week one. And that was just the beginning of the Vinalia adventure.
I want to just immediately jump into the wines, so I'm going to restrain myself for a little bit more. The joke that a lot of people make in the wine business, and I think you did the wine journalism thing at the right time. I wish I had known I liked wine at your age, because all the wine journalists we talk to are like, I love traveling for work, but I'm never going to make a lot of money being a wine journalist or being a wine writer. So I think you did it at the perfect time, and now you're pivoting to starting Vinalia in a way to also fulfill a mission, but also build a business. What difficulties have you found? And as you've evolved, you're a young company, so are you kind of changing, and how have things kind of changed in your beginning in terms of what you thought would work and then what you guys are doing now and what people are really kind of catching on or liking that you're doing?
Oh gosh. I feel like there are so many lessons learned even in our very young life as a company. When we talk about pivots, there are small things that we've done in terms of really figuring out what the correct channels are. We launched as a direct-to-consumer business, really focusing on a subscription model, and that's still something that we very much do and believe in. But selling wines into retail and restaurants is really now our big move for 2024, beginning in the Chicago area where I'm located, and Mary was located up until just a few months ago. But it's our home base. But I think unlike a lot of other young companies, this isn't to say that either is correct or incorrect or good or bad for a company. I think really the core mission of the company, what we've set out to do, and really the essence of the product hasn't actually changed all that much since the very beginning. I mean, I think we've shifted a little bit in language and really what I think who our target customer might be. But at the end of the day, where I've seen a lot of companies just wildly shift, and sometimes very successfully, into an entirely different business model, different business product, ours has really remained pretty true to, I think, what we were trying to accomplish from day one. Mary, correct me. Do you agree?
Totally. I completely agree with you. Yeah. I definitely would say our mission and our ability to deliver the lesser known wines of the wine world has not changed and will never change. It's just, the kind of the avenues in which we're able to deliver those wines, that has evolved. And I'm sure we're less than a year old, so I'm sure it will continue to evolve as well.
Did you run into the standard hurdles of trying to do anything in wine with all of the red tape and the licenses needed to import and distribute and all that as well so far?
Totally. I mean, the good news is, I think with wine businesses is, yes, there's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot to navigate there. But at the end of the day, there are clearly defined or semi-clearly defined laws. And if you have a good lawyer, they'll help you navigate that. It's not a real wheel that startups, young businesses can really reinvent. So as long as you're getting good advice from the right people, those are parameters that you just do have to work in. And any kind of innovation that you bring to the wine industry is really going to kind of have to come through other things rather than legal innovation. Luckily, we have a really excellent team advising us on that front. So we're really happy about that. But when you're just getting into it and finding those partners, it definitely is overwhelming, but certainly achievable.
And the nature of the wines that you guys are bringing in from the producers who are in some of them in relatively obscure parts of the world, how easy, just for the average asset, is it for a normal person to call up someone in that locality and buy a wine and have it shipped, even for an astronomical price, over here to the States? Or is that just not even a possibility for a lot of the labels that you're featuring?
You mean just like a traditional consumer who might visit the region?
Yeah. I mean, there are, what's an example? Oh, like in Greece, went to Greece last year, Santorini. There are several producers who don't distribute in the U.S. or import to the U.S., but they'll ship you wine. It's just going to cost you an arm and a leg, and you have to call them at 1:00 in the morning, our time, kind of thing. Is it that sort of relationship, or is this maybe even farther away from the average consumer here in the U.S.?
I think for a lot of the wines that we're dealing with, certainly some of the wineries, if they have programs and receive frequent tourists, especially from the United States, I'm sure that they can figure out ways to ship their own wine to your doorstep. Exactly how legal those pathways are is there. And again, and you're totally right. It costs an arm and a leg. I mean, it's a pain. But I think really where Vinalia comes in is our producers, they're not in Tuscany. They're not in Bordeaux. They're not in places where traditional American tourists will visit wineries. Even some, they might not even recognize that country makes wine. They might not even typically even venture to visit those countries a lot of time. They might just go totally under the radar. So I think the bigger value that we deliver, even beyond just figuring out all the logistics of bringing the wine to people's doors, which is a lot of logistics. It's a lot of puzzle pieces and trying to figure out how to get things on a boat, on a truck, on a train, on a plane at the right time. But I think the bigger value is is one that we go out and do the work of actually discovering them for the American market and really trying to find those things that people would overlook, those cellar doors that people aren't visiting, those regions and countries that American tourists don't typically visit. And so I think that's really more of the legwork that we do. I think just give one example there. Americans totally visit Croatia. Obviously, that big hot place right now. Mary and I are gearing up to do sourcing there in a couple of weeks from now. And if I were to begin to describe to you the difficulties of accessing some of those vineyards and coming up with an itinerary for someone who just really loves wine and visiting Croatia, it's a total pain. But we're really excited. We're going to be spending a lot of time in the car together. But it's hard for me to envision that a lot of the wineries that we're visiting, American tourists would just stumble upon in their own right.
So I have 2 points on what you were saying. One, I am one of those American tourists. We have a wedding in Montenegro in April, and I was telling Mary that we're going to be doing a week driving up Croatia, and I don't even know where to start. And I work in the wine industry about like how to find some of these places. So I'm going to be looking to you guys for tips when you get back.
Please, we'll have ample experience at that point.
Nice. Yeah, just send me a live feed of yes, no. And then, but I think you guys, you're downplaying a little bit of modesty. A buddy of mine lived in Budapest for a while, at least half the year. And I'd visited him. We love the wines. Like, these wines are amazing. How do we bring these to the US? So we had spent 6 months just kicking around the ways to bring wine in. And once I was like, I think it's harder than you think. And now I'll get him. I have a friend in Portugal. We'll just move him here. It'll come right over. And after thinking about it for a while, we both just kind of gave up. So I think what you guys you make it sound a little easier than it is, but even just moving it around and bringing it here, you need a special set of people. So I think that's impressive that you guys are able to bring them and set up that infrastructure. Yeah. Can we, I don't want to wait too much longer to talk about the wine. So can we talk about some maybe that you have on your website now, a couple of the regions that you are really into right now, and then what's maybe on the horizon? And then we can always mix in other conversations.
Yeah. And first, tell us how Vinalia works in terms of if I'm someone who is starting to get excited about these regions and producers. Subscription, talk about that and the different collections you have on the site.
For sure. If you are new to Vinalia, welcome. We encourage you to explore our diverse portfolio of wines. We do have a bi-monthly subscription available in which you would receive 4 bottles of wine every other month, 4 new bottles and different bottles. And I would say if you are curious to try different wines, especially wines that are almost impossible to access here in the US, our subscription is really the best way to go. It's $98 shipping included. So it's less than $25 a bottle. We think it's a phenomenal deal, almost a steal. But it's really just an amazing way to try those obscure grapes. And not only that, to learn so much about the diverse world of wine around us. What we do at Vinalia is, first and foremost, we want to make sure we deliver customers amazing bottles of wine. That goes without saying. But it's also really important to us to kind of share the stories behind the bottle. We really want to empower consumers so that they're not so intimidated when they go into a wine store and they see that kind of other reds, other whites section. We want them to try our Susum Yellow. And when they go into a wine shop and they see that grape, they're going to be so excited. They're going to be like, oh, I know what that grape is. It's from Puglia. It's an indigenous varietal from over there. And that's so much what we're about. So if you subscribe to us, you can go on our website. You can read all these stories about the grapes themselves, the producers, the regions, nerds here at Vinalia. So we love to get into the details. But so the subscription's a great way to try everything. But if you're not into that as well, that's totally fine. We have a lot of curated collections if you're just looking to kind of dip your toe into the world of Vinalia. So say if you just went on a vacation to let's say Slovenia, we have a Balkan Peninsula box in which we showcase wines from that area. We also have an all red adventure if you're looking to try, if you're a diehard red person, but looking to try, you're a little tired of the Napa Cab, the Argentinian Malbec. We have a lot of other things that are in similar profiles and veins, but are definitely new that you haven't tried before. So many options. I mean, diversity in our collection is just everything we're about. And so there's really no shortage of adventures you could have with Vinalia.
And I think you asked us about what our wines that we're excited about, and it's a challenge. I mean, I feel like there are children, and so picking favorites is hard. But I do have them, and I think a lot of parents do too. But I think some that I'm really excited about, and Billy, you mentioned you're Hungarian, and my family is partly too, and so I knew getting Hungarian wine into our portfolio was going to be very important to me from the very beginning. I also just got a personal note. I mean, one of my favorite categories of wine is dessert wine, which we do not sell at the moment, but maybe one day down the line. But Tokai is very near and dear to my heart. As a journalist, I got to visit Tokai, which was an unbelievable experience. And I think most people aren't aware that Hungary makes wine. If they do, the only thing that they'll know is Tokai, which is great. It's one of the greatest wines in the entire world. But there's so much to explore in Hungary, even just outside of Tokai and the grape that's used to make it, which is ferment, dry ferment, which is also excellent. So I'm really excited about the Hungarian wines that we've brought into our portfolio. We have 3 from a producer called Tóth Ferenc, which is one of the, I think, most excellent producers in the Eger region of Hungary, which is really smack dab in the middle between Tokai and Budapest. And the style of wine that they're most famous for making there is a style called Egri Bikaver, which Bikaver translates to bull's blood. And I mean, the way that the story goes with bull's blood is, I mean, hardly likely to be true, but it's a really, really excellent legend. Like, the legend of Bikaver goes that in 1552, the town of Eger was really right on the border between Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. And they were constantly defending themselves. They were constantly getting into different skirmishes. And in 1552, the townspeople in Eger were quite convinced that the Ottoman army was coming and they were going to come and take over their castle. And this was kind of the end. So what did the guy who was captaining their army do? He gives their soldiers a whole bunch of wine just to get them in the fighting spirit or prepare for their own end of days. So anyways, they all get trashed on the local wine. And the next day, when the Ottoman army comes, they just see all of these Hungarian soldiers and their beards are just like dripping in this viscous red wine, and it's covering their armor. And the Ottomans, coming from, Islamic background where they're not allowed to drink alcohol, are less familiar with wine, and they really had convinced themselves that these soldiers had just drunk the local blood of their bulls to give them virility and prepare them for battle. And there's like, these people are insane. And so they actually retreat. And the townspeople in Eger get to save their castle for one more day. They don't get to for eternity. But and that's the story of where bull's blood comes from. And the bull's blood that we have, our Egri Bikaver from Tóth Ferenc, is one of my absolute favorites. And it's one of the premier red wine styles in all of Hungary. It's typically based on Kek Frankos, which is the same grape as Blaufränkisch, a really, really excellent Eastern European grape variety. But it's blended with a whole bunch of other different stuff. And the story, I mean, there's a lot of gaps there. We do know that in that time in the 16th century that there was actually a lot more white grapes planted in the Eger region than red, and red is a more recent arrival. So the story doesn't entirely hold up. But what you do have today is you still do actually have a very potent, really powerful red wine style. It reminds me a little bit of Chateauneuf du Pape or different kind of Côte de Rhône wines. But that's a personal favorite of mine that's been keeping me warm this winter.
Yeah, I love that story. I mean, I've heard every iteration of they drank it so that they could fight longer and all that, but it is one of my favorites too. And what's cool to me about that wine, at least that style, I don't know, that the one you've had, is Blaufränkisch or Kek Frankos in general has that acidic backbone a little bit too. So it is rich, but it also it's so well balanced, and it also it's great. I personally, I've had a limited amount compared to you probably for sure, but like some Chateauneufs can get so ripe and over and unbalanced. They need to add all those varieties in to make it balanced, whereas these are a little bit more straightforward, and the Blaufränkisch or Kek Frankos really shines.
Absolutely. Acidity totally keeps it all in check and in balance, which is great.
And it means the same thing, right? Blaufränkisch just means blue Frankish, and then Kek Frankos just means the same thing. I'm pretty sure.
Exactly. We have another one from Slovenia, which is another Blaufränkisch blend, but there they call it Modra Frankina. We have a winery called Merov in eastern Slovenia. So most Slovenian wine that you see in the United States comes from western Slovenia, right on the Italian border. This one is right actually on the Hungarian border. And that's another wonderful wine that we really, really love. That winery, Merov, they cellar their wine until they deem it ready to release. So we sell the current release, and it's 2017. It's a red wine that already has 7 years of age on it before being released to the public.
Nice. What are some other regions that you guys have on the site right now in general? Just also, because I know you guys have some from the Friuli Slovenia border, which is another favorite of ours, or mine and my fiance's, not Brady's, but Brady should like them as well.
Yeah, from there we have a Ribolla Gialla and a Friulano, and we call them baby orange wines because they're not orange, but they do dip their toes into kind of the extended skin contact maceration fermentation. For those lovers of the natural wine movement and orange wine, I think they're really great. If you're looking to experiment with the natural wine movement and orange wine, they're also really great because they're not, I would say, strong in kind of that tannin feel that you do get with, I would say, full-fledged orange wines, but they're really phenomenal. It's a mother-son duo over there, and our producers are called Ronco della Betul, and they produce really incredible wines. Ribolla Gialla and Friulano are indigenous to the area. And I remember we actually talked about those grapes when we first met, Billy. You really loved them. So those are phenomenal. I also would say one of my favorites producers and regions that I'm loving is actually the Niagara Peninsula up in Canada. We have a dry Riesling and a Cabernet Franc from our producers Cave Spring. And truly, I mean, I've just been kind of crushing on those wines all winter long. They're so delicious. And I love introducing people to those wines because when friends and family say Canada, they make wine. What? They're so shocked. And truly, the quality is excellent. Bryce and I spent a weekend up there. And honestly, the amount of incredible tastings we had, just unbelievable. There are so many vineyards producing so many excellent wines. And more than that, they've invested so much in wine tourism. It's just right over the border. And for people living in even like Chicago, it would be a great weekend vacation. Like instead of going to Napa, I highly recommend going to Niagara. It's so cute, so lovely, great food. Bryce introduced me to butter tarts, which I definitely don't think I needed that in my life because there's the word savage, but they were amazing and delicious also for this time of year.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was looking at the Niagara wine as well. I'm caught up when I'm looking at the website in some of the just design choices, both of the bottles and of your site itself. It seems like someone has a background or you worked with an agency or something because the the design is excellent. I like the way that the information that you give seems really helpful, especially with the pronunciation of some of these varieties people might not be familiar with. Can you tell us about maybe like the label design and sort of how you package these wines and the partnerships and how you try and obviously put your own spin on these labels that you've picked out, but also pay homage to the producers that you're working with, obviously?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fine balance to strike. And I think one thing that was really important for us, we see a lot of wine clubs in the United States where all the wines are just it's opaque to where they're coming from. I mean, even not just wine clubs. I mean, there's celebrity labels that you'll find out in retail. And it's really, really difficult for people to know where their wine is coming from. We live in an age where people are certainly very eager to know where their food is coming from. And, we're starting to see with beverage that it's really no different there either. And again, at the core value of Vinalia is sharing these stories of these places that are lesser known. And so championing the stories of our supplier partners, the wineries that we work with. I mean, that's really at the heart of what we do. And so something that we do need to be reflected on the label. At the same time, a lot of the labels that the wineries have in in their home country. They're designed for a different taste, for maybe a consumer that's of an older generation, or one that's, there's just different aesthetics that sell in their local markets than what sells in the United States market. So we really want to guide them into an aesthetic that really works to reach the customers that we want to in the United States. We work with a really talented graphic designer, and as you'll see, our entire brand is presented as collaborations between us, Vinalia, and the winery. So it's completely transparent to where the wines are coming from, really trying to share their stories, share photography from the local regions, but at the same time having an overarching brand aesthetic for Vinalia that kind of marry those two kind of goals.
And I would just add on that too. So in all of our labels, we always feature a human, a person. And that is a strategic choice of ours, because we strongly believe that the wine that's in your glass, it's made by humans. It's made by the strategic choices that people are making in the vineyard, in the winery. It's truly an art and a craft. And a lot of people kind of like let's just let the juice be juice, no touching. But we fully believe that it's those choices by the humans that really make what you're tasting and what you're experiencing. And so we are all about celebrating those people that are crafting these amazing wines.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like the looking through sort of some of the differences, and even some differences in the bottle type and the bottle shape. Even like, I'm not actually sure what it's called, but embossment or stamping on the bottle. What's it called where you have the raised text on certain bottles?
Actually, I don't know the specific term.
Yeah, the glass. I always like that. Chateauneuf de Pape, like all the wines are that way, right?
Exactly. In a lot of regions, some of it's legally mandated. So, I mean, the Aigri Bicavert that I was talking about earlier, there's a special Aigri Bicavert bottle that producers of Aigri Bicavert, they're either obligated to use it or the only ones who are allowed to use it. I'm not sure which one it is. It depends on the region with those sorts of things. But yeah, so I mean, it's a bottle shape that I'd never seen before. It's a little kind of square and a little bit more squat than other bottles, but it's really fun. And when our winery partners have those special extra touches or something that we always are really excited about.
That's awesome. So you're receiving bottled wine with the winery's glass. You're not receiving juice and then doing any bottling operations at all here in the States?
No. I mean, we bring in the wines into the United States. I mean, all the bottling is done in Europe, but all the labeling is done there as well.
Here. Sure.
Yeah, so
I see.
The United States in their finished form.
Do you need to send them the labels? I guess the strips and all the import stuff comes a little bit later, but do you have to do you make them here and then send them there, knowing that some of these places might not have printing facilities?
So as of right now, we don't. So I mean, they don't have printing on site at the wineries, but they work with printers for their own labels. So we work with them to figure out what their precise bottle dimensions are, and then create labels to fit the standards of their own printers.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Bottling wine.
So what part, looking through the different options, obviously there's the collections and subscription, but also you can just buy bottles a la carte. Out of the shop, it looks like. Have you been surprised at where new fans of Vinalia have come and spent their time and resources in terms of what they're purchasing? Are they purchasing single bottles, a la carte, subscription, and how have those parts of the business grown?
Yeah, I would say so. To date, we've really got a lot of our customers doing in-person tastings, just like the way traditional wine brands do it. And because so much about Vinalia's storytelling aspect, Bryce and I love getting in front of a group and kind of sharing those. I mean, the Aigri Bicavert story is just one, but basically all of our bottles have really interesting stories that we can share. And because our portfolio is diverse, there are many different types of theme tastings that we're able to do and put on. I already mentioned a Balkans tasting. We do a Backroads of Italy. They're truly endless. A woman in wine. And we've just been able to find a lot of success at these events. The wine really speaks for itself, but the storytelling aspect really resonates with consumers, because a lot of consumers, we may, for example, want to know how long a wine has been aged on lees. The general consumer doesn't. But what resonates with them is someone's beard soaked in what looks like blood. And they're like, oh, that's like that story. Oh, that's that wine. Oh, I loved that wine. And we've been really shocked how much people just are falling in love with the stories behind the bottle. So that's definitely been one surprise. In terms of the actual wines that they're buying, it's all over. But one thing that we've noticed, it doesn't matter the demographic. People are loving floral white wines, and it's pretty overwhelming that like all of our tasting, I would say the floral white in whatever we're pouring, people it's normally the crowd pleaser. And it is interesting because and it's not just some people think, oh, it's more women who would like that. Not at all. It is truly across the board. People love that. I don't know if that's a shift in drinking. People are a little tired of the high alcohol, tannic, very heavy wines, but people really gravitate to the floral whites in our collection. And Bryce and I sometimes talk. We're like, should we add some more floral whites to our portfolio? We already have so many. Yet this is what our consumers really like. There's no shortage of those. But yeah, that's been surprising. I don't know, Bryce, what you think.
I could personally die on a desert island with exclusively dry muscat and be a very happy camper. I didn't realize that so many other people felt the same way. And I mean, I think to look a little bit further context there, I mean, the family of Muscat grapes and the family of Malvasia grapes, I mean, is a really storied and diverse and ancient one that extends all across the Mediterranean basin. So there is a massive tradition of kind of these floral white grape varieties that you see in so many of the oldest wine growing regions of the world, whether that is Greece or southern Italy or the Levant, Cyprus. And extending, I mean, you have Muscatel sherries and Muscatel wines in Portugal. So really all around in North Africa. And they have amazing stories and they just taste absolutely delicious. And there's so many of them. And there's so many that I would love to bring in. I didn't realize that there was such a thirst for many different types of floral whites, but as long as people keep wanting them, we'll keep bringing them.
The thing I love most about those wines in particular, and Brady and the podcast listeners will be tired of me talking about The Story of Wine by Hugh Johnson. But I've been listening to it for a few years now. And he emphasizes both of those grapes. And it's like, those are two of the grapes that the name has been only just slightly changed over this period of time. They've been like so famous in the vernacular. It's not like they're evolving and everybody wants to emulate what that original style was like. And they bring it and try to grow it like that. It's so cool how some of those styles are. I like to think it still tastes something like it might have back then. Probably not with all the things that were added or the way it was made, but still, I just love the idea that the name, if I went back 2,000 years, may resonate with someone.
Absolutely.
They may know what I'm talking about. So cool. I wanted to ask something that I've always considered not considered. My biggest issue, when we have really cool small producers, I want to go and sell them somewhere. Unless you're doing it D2C, I feel like retailers always want volume. And if it sells well, then they want you to be able to replace it. How are you walking that line as you move into the retail side of bringing these cool wines and having a Vinalia name and consistency, but maybe not the exact wines over and over?
It's an excellent question. And I think a lot of that story is still yet to be told because we're just entering wholesale. So exactly what people will expect and demand is on the horizon line for us and things that we're trying to figure out in the initial conversations that we're having. That said, one thing that I would probably want to clear is a number of our producers are quite small, and that's totally true. And we will only be able to sell them direct to consumer. And those aren't the ones that we're going to put into wholesale channels. At the same time, we do have a number of producers that we work with that are on the medium or medium plus size too, that made absolutely exceptional wine with the same sort of care and meticulous ethos, the attention to detail of the small producers. I've had so much wine in my career, and I've had absolutely terrible wines from small producers and absolutely exceptional wines from giant producers. So I would probably want to fight against the misconception that the size of a winery necessarily dictates quality. But in terms of the logistical question, I think one of the beauties of having kind of a direct-to-consumer subscription model is that We can bring in a lot of wine, and it's whoever gets it first. If we're really passionate about a wine that we can only get a half pallet of, if it's really important for us to tell that story of that wine, we'll absolutely bring it into the United States, and that the customers who are most care about it, the market will dictate, who's able to get there first. But there's no shortage of wine that we have. There's available volumes of that you're not really seeing in American retail right now, but we're really excited to bring it there.
Are you finding anybody that you're working with? I've only kind of read about these and experienced a few in person. Is they're smaller, they're bottling some of their own stuff under their own name, maybe to sell locally or in their kind of local market, but then they're selling the rest of their fruit or juice to co-ops just to kind of get things by, because they're like, I don't know how to even sell this much wine. Do you have anybody who is kind of like that, where they could, in theory, sell more of their own wine if they wanted to, they just can't actually move it if they created it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think with our producers, I don't know of any of them selling any of their grapes to cooperatives. We've looked at cooperatives as well and talked to them. Cooperatives, I think, are one of the most kind of untapped resources in the wine world. And there's a lot of misnomers out there about what cooperative wine is. A lot of cooperatives kind of were born in really the interwar, the post-war era. We're seeing the modern wine industry coalesce, and you have all these people who are coming from agrarian societies that have inherited these small plots of grapes but don't have the equipment or the ability to commercialize them on their own. And over time, I think over the last few decades especially, you've seen in so many different parts of the wine world, take Champagne, for example, you see this grower Champagne movement. You're seeing all these producers who had been selling their grapes to cooperatives for so many years, exceptional fruit, realizing, okay, now they have family members who want to dedicate the time and the resources to create their own winery around their own land. A lot of families still haven't had that privilege yet. And a lot of it, especially in a lot of lesser known regions. So where we haven't worked with any cooperatives yet, it's certainly something that we would welcome. The other kind of tricky part with cooperatives too, in Eastern Europe, a lot of them view the co-op model as akin to the collectivism that they experience behind the Iron Curtain. So they actually don't in a lot of regions where you would expect them to have cooperatives, because you see them in a lot of lesser known regions in France and Spain and Italy, some of them making phenomenal wine, some other cooperatives have a little bit more work to do on that front. But a lot of that, you will see these producers banding together in regions that don't have a lot of brand recognition. You don't actually have that in Eastern Europe. So you have a lot of really, really large, massive wineries. And then over the last few decades, you've seen a rise of individual independent wineries that can be of any size. A lot of them are small. I think a lot of really the top ones right now are really in the medium size. I think that's really the sweet spot in Eastern Europe, but they don't have co-ops. So it's really interesting. I think kind of one example in our portfolio there right now is the producer Divino in Romania, which they're arguably the most prestigious producer in Romania. If you're studying winemaking at Bucharest, the wines from Divino, their Feteasca Neagra and their Feteasca Alba, are used as the textbook examples of what the signature indigenous grape varieties of Romania should taste like. They were only, Mary, correct me, I know you've shared this story in public more often than I have. They were one of the first 2 or 3 privatized wineries in Romania after its separation from the Soviet Union. Do you remember the exact number?
They were number 3 when they were founded in the late 90s.
Yeah. So, I mean, really just even having independent wineries in so many of these countries is still actually a really recent innovation.
That's actually my least favorite part about communism. Not everybody, we can get into the whole politics, is that they ended up forcing people to make crappy wine and ruin so many amazing historical vineyards.
It's crazy. Speaking of just back to Hungary, and this is not a producer that we work with, but that I absolutely adore, István Szepsi in Tokaj, one of kind of the fathers of the modern Tokaj industry. But he'll recall in the 1950s in his family cellar, having Soviet soldiers walk into their family home with Tommy guns, demanding that they relinquish their barrels to the state monopoly. So it's really crazy stuff. So many of these wine growers are still alive today, what they've lived through, and really the kind of massive, massive shifts they've seen in the structure of their own local wine industries.
Yeah, even the demand for they change their farming practices to have higher yields, but they're like, this is going to make worse wine, and it's just it's horrible. But anyway,
well, and one of the biggest victims was the grapes themselves, because a lot of indigenous grapes that are really, really interesting, the ones that we love to work with, they were uprooted during those time periods in favor of grapes that were higher yielding. And then that's not just the Soviet Union. If you go to Spain, during the Franco era, that was a mandate too. And even in France, in the after the phylloxera crisis that completely upended the entire European vinescape in the mid to late 19th century, a lot of the solution for a lot of the wineries that were trying to replenish their stocks after was just to plant higher yielding grape varieties around the turn of the century. And so a lot of the diversity of the wine world was either lost or nearly lost. And a lot of the producers that we work with today are super passionate about preserving the biodiversity of the wine world and resuscitating a lot of their indigenous grape varieties from risk of extinction.
Nice. Yeah, as we get to the end here, I want to do just a quick flash round. One question, since we've talked about so much obscure varieties and obscure regions, and rightfully, but what are, like, just for you guys in your wine journey or right now, more common regions and wines that you drink the most of, if any, these days? And you can say Burgundy.
Talking outside Vinalia, so going back more towards the common. I mean, I also do love classic wines too, and I drink a lot of them. I think Rioja is one that's really, really special to me, and I'm like happy and I'm not happy that it's seen the resurgence and attention that's had in the last decade. I know when I initially started buying Lopez de Heredia, which is one of the most iconic producers in Rioja, one of my absolute favorites. It was a complete, utter steal for the wine. And now they're charging what they really deservedly should be making, but it makes it a little bit harder for me to just go buy on my own. But I do love it dearly. And Rioja, I think, is one that I'm glad that people have started to discover, because it's such a special place.
Yeah, I think that the Tondonia, at least in my, might be because I moved to California, but I was in New York before. It doubled in price in the past 6 years. Like, to your point, it's still undervalued. But before, I was like, this is amazing. It's like it's still the password to a couple of my accounts, just like one of the vintages I used to be able to get for like $30.
Yeah, no, I mean, and they're like Rosado, which, like, when they were initially selling it before the big rosé wave in the United States, like, they would sell it for $15 a bottle, and now you can see it on the secondary market for easily $200. It's so hard to get your hands on, but it's really tasty if you do.
I would say I'm a little biased because half my family now is French, but the classic French regions, I love Burgundy. I love Côte d'Or wines, particularly Volnay. I will never get tired of drinking Volnay. But as Bryce knows very well, my true one love is champagne. And I will always be down for a nice glass of champagne. I currently love Pierre Peters, but I also love a lot of the grower champagne that's happening right now. My favorites are Blanc de Blancs, but there's never enough champagne in my life.
That's awesome. Yeah, Bryce, you have to, what's just a quick note on, you said dessert wines were some of your favorite and sweet wines. What is, throw a couple that we should explore, or listeners should explore out there?
Ooh, gosh, there's so many. Pasito di Pantelleria, which comes from, it is a Muscat variety. It's Muscat of Alexandria, but there they call it Sabibo, which is an even more fun name. It's a Sicilian island, but it's actually closer to Tunisia than it is to mainland Sicily, and they make a dried grape wine there that is absolutely phenomenal. Another one that I really love is, it's the oldest known named wine that's still in production today. Commanderia from Cyprus. It's also a dried grape wine. They make from two grapes there called Mavro and Zinasteri. Absolutely phenomenal. Really, really luscious, intense, long, and total steals. I think there's only a couple that you can find in the United States market right now. The one that you see most often is Commanderia St. John, which comes from a larger winery, but they do a really good job. It's bottles of it pop up most often around Greek Easter, because I guess there are communities that really look to find Commanderia in the United States around that time. Another really great example of Commanderia is from a winery called Chakas, which is pioneering a more contemporary style of Commanderia that's a little bit lighter on its feet, a little bit more heavy on white grapes rather than red grapes because it's a blend of the two. But really, really lovely wines all around there. So those are two. Pasito di Pantelleria and Commanderia are two lesser-known dessert wines that I highly, highly recommend.
That's awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for joining. I really appreciate it. This is unlike anything I think that we've featured on the podcast before, just in terms of how focused you guys are on these types of varieties. Like Billy said, we talk about obscure regions often, but I really like to see the focus and the intentionality that you guys are putting towards it.
It's our pleasure. Thank you so much for having us. And Billy, when you're gearing up for Croatia, shoot us a note and we'll send you some of our soon-to-be had experiences there.
Yeah, Bryce, I think we're just going to have to just virtually hang out sometime, or all three of us. We'll have Mary over and just put you on a screen, because I love these conversations. Offline, I'll have to pick your brain about how to find the equivalent of 3 Petonios Tokai, because that was my favorite number of Petonios, and it's not labeled anymore.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, no, like Brady said, thank you. I don't know why I hadn't before, but while we've been on the call, I signed up for the club. So I'm really excited to start receiving you guys' wines. And thanks again for joining.
Oh, amazing. We're excited to get some stuff your way.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having us.
All right. I hope everybody enjoyed that interview with Bryce and Mary. There's so much I enjoyed in that conversation, including the bull's blood story. I love that story. I hope everybody got a kick out of that too. And since we've actually recorded the interview, I've heard about Commanderia, which is one of the oldest wines that Bryce mentioned as well. So super cool to learn about all these things. I hope you guys learned a bit, and definitely check them out at vinaliawine.com. And then also you can also see them at Vinalia Wine is their handle, their Instagram handle at Vinalia Wine. So check them out, and we'll be back with another episode next week.
To check out our current offerings and to sign up for the Vint platform, find us at www.vint.co. That's www.vint.co. For questions, comments, or feedback on the Vint podcast, please email us at support@vint.co. Vint and VV Markets are offering securities pursuant to Regulation A. Our offering circular as amended can be found on the SEC website. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Investments such as those on the Vint platform are speculative and involve substantial risks to consider before investing. We may provide communication that may contain certain forward-looking statements that are subject to various risks and uncertainties. Information provided in any communications, including this podcast, is not legal, business, or tax advice. All prospective investors should consult a legal, tax, or business advisor concerning the subject matter of any communications and any offering.